there's a really interesting ethical dilemma that's happening right now, which is genetic screening of embryos in vitro fertilization, and its big brother or daughter or whatever next generation of that technology is going to be CRISPR, which is going to be direct genetic manipulation of the next generation instead of just screening. On the one hand, there's a really compelling argument for this. If you're a parent, your job as a parent is to create the best life for your child as possible. So if you have the ability to keep your child from having an intensely painful, debilitating genetic disease, certainly as a parent you have an obligation or an understandable interest in doing that. If I could stop my child from having a horrible disease that would be terrible for them their entire life, wouldn't I want to do that? But then pump the brakes, because on the other hand, there's a really terrifying view, which is an implication of this, which is if we allow human beings, us, to genetically screen the next generation, or directly genetically manipulate the next generation, as in the case with CRISPR, we run into a really difficult question, which is, how is that not eugenics? That's what we're gonna talk about today. So, eugenics, if you don't know, is the direct manipulation of the population's genetic code, popularized by the Nazis, because they believed that there was a purest, whatever, highest form of humanity, the Aryans, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, the whatever. And so if that's where history is going, then that's like what the best version of humanity is, then we should just accelerate towards that future where, and so anyone who doesn't fit those characteristics should be eliminated from the population. So obviously that's terrible, but the question is that not what we're doing if we're doing genetic screening of the next generation? One of my professors, Dan Fogel, said that in Iceland, they're actually, this is already happening. This is not like a far future scenario. Down syndrome is being screened against, and children with Down syndrome are not being born as a result. And so the entire population has a lower incidence of Down syndrome. Just what does that imply, and is that not somehow terrible? So to return to the initial question, right? If you're a parent and you have the ability to stop your child from having Down syndrome somehow, wouldn't you want to do that? But then also, what kind of society are we creating if we say that anyone who has Down syndrome should just not be born? They're a burden on the world. That's a terrifying possible way of speaking as well. So this is a one video in probably what will be a lot, and this falls under the umbrella debate of the question of human enhancement, and this is just going to get worse and worse with CRISPR and as time goes on, as I mentioned. So what I want to do today is I just want to lay a couple of different views on the table, specifically conservatism, liberalism, and libertarianism. Okay. And then old eugenics, Nazi eugenics, we already talked about. There's a new thing that people are fighting for right now, called the new eugenics, or like liberal eugenics. And so let's just go through those in order and see what happens. So conservatism. Sandel wrote a book called The Case Against Perfection, and he talks about muscle enhancement and memory enhancement and growth hormone treatment and gender selection and designer baby stuff and all this jazz. And there's some interesting points in this about the conservative position is we should not be allowed to genetically manipulate the next generation. There are too many problems with that. Just to name a couple, it would stratify society because the rich would have access to it and the poor wouldn't, and we would create like two subspecies within humankind, and like that would make classism worse because there would be literal genetic differences between the two classes and not just epigenetic and sociocultural differences between social classes. So that would be a good reason not to. And then there's two other arguments for the conservative view. One is like the human essentialism, that like what it means to be human is just this essential thing that you you shouldn't mess with. It comes from theology. Don't play God. Don't mess with the essential human substance that we are right now. I don't find that personally convincing because that's what evolution is doing all the damn time. So like we were once shrimp or whatever we were. I'd ask a biologist. We were once smaller things that were dumber, and we're not us. We're constantly changing. We're taller than previous generations, or shorter, or whatever. As time passes, we are not the same species anymore, bit by bit by bit by bit. And so the idea that human essentialism, it's less convincing to me. And then Sandel, I'm going to name another argument of his, is this thing called openness to the unbidden, or just like openness to probability. And this argument has some, I'm like a little bit sympathetic to it. And the idea is that part of what it means to be in the parent-child relationship is to be open to the choices and decisions and attributes of that child, because that child might be something completely different than what you expect. So like you really want a child who's like a dancer, and then you get a physicist, like sucks for you. Or you really want a child who's an athlete, and then you get a dancer, like sucks for you. But what Sandel would say is that that's an intrinsic part of the parent-child relationship, openness to uncertainty around what a child might be. Cool. And so if we are genetically manipulating the next generation, then that means that we're actually not open to letting them turn into what they are, because we're grabbing their essence, as it were, and manipulating them. Okay. Cool. I think my phone might freak out at me for a second, so I'm going to plug this in, and then it's probably going to run out of room because it's old and whatever. Okay. So the other question is, so in response to this, there is another view on the other side. So the conservative view, just don't mess with what it means to be an essential human. And then the libertarian view, or what I'm going to call the libertarian view, which is the it's really okay, just do whatever you want view. There are probably some problems. There are probably some problems with that one too. Like, what if a parent says, "Let me just genetically manipulate my child so that it has a tail or 4 arms"? I mean, these are not possible. But like, I want a child with autism, or I want a child who's blind, or I want a child who's, like, I don't know, name something that you could do to a human. It seems like if we are allowing parents to just do whatever they want to the next generation, then we would allow for some really unintuitive non-moral, counterintuitive things. That's also a possibility. So, conservative, don't mess with human essence. Libertarian, basically do whatever you want. There's no such thing as a human essence, and so meh. This view seems to not be honest to the fact that human essence is changing all the time. Like, probably humans are a little different now that there's so much technology in our lives. And then this view seems not to be honest to the fact that, like, no, like, kids have rights. You can't, like, have a kid with, like, no brain or something. Like, there's clear moral boundaries that you can't manipulate the next generation just for whatever reason you want. There's another view that sits in the middle, and this view is what is called liberal eugenics. Ugh, those are the words. That's what they call themselves. Ugh. I don't know whether that's me, because it's got the word eugenics. But the view in the middle is the liberal eugenics view. And it takes a lot of forms. It could mean a lot of different things. But one possible way that the liberal eugenics view could be argued for, and I'm going to say this, and then I might leave this video and then do another one on some, like, details of these. But here's the argument, right? Where I think it was Sandel who quoted this from someone else. I can't remember exactly who, but he said, like, the Nazis just gave eugenics a bad name. So just, like, whatever, let's just try and interpret that charitably. And the idea is that the reason that Nazi eugenics was morally impermissible, where liberal eugenics would be permissible, is that the Nazi eugenics was mandatory. It was follow our rules or we kill you. Liberal eugenics, apparently, as a view, is a view where individual parents make individual choices about their children, granted within some kind of moral bounds, rejecting the libertarian view about genetic manipulation. Now, it sounds okay, right? It sounds like, oh, cool, like, yeah, it's not mandatory, so it seems like it might be all right. But there are actually a couple of there's a couple of really complicated possible objections to that claim.